Hello, and welcome to the nonprofit world, where we highlight organizations and individuals who are passionate about empowering people to make a difference in the lives of others, in our community and around the world. I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean, your host for today's program, and I'm excited today to have with me Patti Philippon, who is the
Executive
Director of the American Clock and Watch Museum in Bristol, Connecticut. Welcome, Patti.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So glad that you're here. It is just fascinating to see and read about the what you have at the American Clock and Watch Museum. So I want you to tell us a little bit about how the museum got started, maybe a little history of the museum.
Absolutely. So the museum was actually founded in 1952, and we opened our doors in 1954. And it was founded by a gentleman whose name was Edward Ingram, and he was the head of the Ingram Clock Company, which was right in Bristol. And so as you can imagine, he had a vested interest in keeping that history and the legacy of the clock industry alive and well. And he saw after the Second World War was over that there was a change in the clock industry and the watch industry, and a lot of the business had gone overseas. And he was very concerned with keeping that legacy alive and preserving it for future generations. So he and 10 other gentlemen got together and they founded the museum, and they, as I said, they opened it in 1954. We were the first museum dedicated to clocks and watches in the country. And we opened with about 300 timepieces, many of them from Edward's own personal collection, which a lot of people think it sounds like a lot of clocks to have, but then when you think he actually owned his own clock company, maybe not so many. And so we kept expanding from there. We currently have about 5,500 clocks and watches.
My goodness. And
about 1,500 of them you can see anytime you come through the museum.
That is wonderful. What a neat history.
It is, and actually Bristol in this area and Connecticut in general has a really rich, deep history in the clock industry. Lots of clock manufacturing, lots of watch manufacturing here, because the area really had a lot of the natural resources that people needed in order to make these timepieces. They had the rivers to use for production as well as transportation. They had a lot of natural resources in terms of wood to use for things like the movements and the cases and things like that. And then places like the brass industry in Waterbury, it really all came together right here in Connecticut, and particularly here in Bristol.
Well, I have to tell you, it's been exciting for me because I was born and raised in Texas and have lived in Connecticut since 2005. But while I was in Texas, I started probably 30 years ago a clock collection of my own, and so I have about 8 antique clocks, big wall clocks, and I didn't realize the significance to me personally until we moved up here, because 3 of those clocks I believe were made in New Haven, and the others don't have a location on them, but I suspect that some of them probably were made up here as well.
Absolutely. You can find Connecticut clocks pretty much no matter where you go. And funny, I actually have a similar story, because when I didn't grow up in Bristol, but when I moved here, one of the first things that my husband and I had done was we went to an appraisal day at the Historical Society, and I brought my grandmother's clock that she and my grandfather had gotten as a wedding present. And then it got passed down to me, and all I knew about it was that it was my grandparents' clock. And so I decided to bring this timepiece, and it ends up that it was a Bristol clock made right in town, and I knew nothing about it. And that was probably a good 10 years before I ever started at the Clock and Watch Museum. So it seems like things really came full circle right back to Bristol in the clock industry.
That's wonderful. That's a neat story. Can you tell us how you came to the Clock Museum in the position that you are today?
Absolutely. I have worked in museums my whole professional career. I really enjoy the atmosphere in the nonprofit and the museum field, and have worked in a number of different places, and was working at the Mark Twain House in Hartford. And I had been there for about 16 years, and my husband saw the position in the paper at the Clock and Watch Museum that they were looking for a director, and he said, this seems like it's a great opportunity and you should look into it. And so I did, because it really, it sounded exciting, it sounded different and fun, and there's something really special about living in the community and working in the community as well. And it's been a great experience for me, and I love it.
That's wonderful. Well, and I think you're obviously, just by talking to you, passionate about what you're doing and at the Clock Museum. So
definitely, I think it's important, and this was part of our founding premises as well, is to really engage people with their histories and their local histories. It's important that it's not forgotten, and it's fun to bring it to new generations of people.
And so I see too that you have, you're open for groups to come in, children's groups like from schools or scouts or other programs, as well as adults.
Absolutely. We are actually open, most of the year we're open 7 days a week, and in the wintertime we open on the weekends. Or by happy accident. Ring the doorbell if we're there. We're happy to let you in and give you a tour. But we do, in addition to the people who are just walk-in visitors, we do special programs for groups. You can come and get a generalized tour. We do programs for schools that can be more curriculum-based. For instance, a couple of years ago, we piloted a program on assembly line production with Bristol third graders, because in third grade, Bristol schools learn about Bristol history. And so they learn about the clock industry and the watch industry here. And so we piloted this program for talking about how assembly line production was more efficient than a master craftsman working on a timepiece. And it's something that isn't only for Bristol, but they were who we piloted with, and it's been great. They've come back the subsequent years to do the program as well. We do programs with scouts. We can do programs for your book club and things like that. We've done a number of programs on the Radium Girls, for instance, which is a book that had just come out a couple years ago. We can really tailor a lot of different things depending on the group and their interests and what they're looking to get out of the experience.
Okay. Does it matter? Is there a limit to the size of the group? Either a lower limit or an upper limit?
We do group tours for 10 and over, generally. But if you're just a single person walking in, you're more than welcome to come into the museum. In terms of larger groups, for guided tours, we probably about 60 is a good group, and then we'll have a couple of different docents start people off at different sides of the museums.
Yeah. Okay.
We actually have 8 galleries in the museum, which is a lot bigger than people think that we are.
Yeah, it doesn't look that big from the outside.
Absolutely. We are housed in this 1801 house, and so from the front it looks small, but then there's 2 additions and a second level in the back that people don't necessarily see.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mentioned to you that had some friends in from out of state a few years back, and we went and just did a self-guided tour. It was just fascinating just to see the history of the clockmaking, especially the history here in the United States, and then just to see all the beautiful clocks that are in the big room all around.
So. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
It's wonderful, and they enjoyed it too. He's a history buff, so he really, he had a really good time.
No pun intended, right? It's been actually really wonderful because we've been trying very hard to welcome other groups of people in. Other than, you don't have to be a horologist, you don't have to be a clock repairer, that doesn't have to be your focus in order to really be entertained and engaged and excited about our collections. My background is actually art history. And so for me, being able to see the artistry of the timepieces, whether it's the reverse glass painting on the tablet or the wood carving on the cases or the engravings on the dials and things like that, that's very exciting. History people, of course, find it very exciting. Science and technology engineers, they love seeing how the pieces work together and how the clock movements have evolved over time and watch movements have evolved over time. And there's really a lot of different things to excite and engage people. And then, of course, we always have people come in and see a timepiece that has a special personal reference for them. People will look at something and say, my grandmother had that timepiece, or I remember that, the sunburst clock in my kitchen in the 60s or something like that. And they always find something that strikes a memory and a chord with them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So how do you get your funding? You're a nonprofit.
We are.
So how do you get your funding?
Well, we are a private nonprofit, so we don't have federal funding or anything like that. A lot of what we do is funded by those wonderful visitors who come through our doors, people who shop in the gift shop, members, annual fund donations, and then we work to write grants for special projects and fundraising events we've started doing more of as well.
Okay, great, wonderful. Can you tell us about some of your fundraising events?
Absolutely. So one of the events that has been very successful for us over the last 2 years, we just had the second one, is an event called Wine, Women, and Watches, and we hold it annually in September. Okay. And it started off because we wanted to do a fun fundraiser for the museum to bring in somewhat of a different demographic for us and really introduce the museum to people in a different and fun sort of way. Mm-hmm. So it's not only for women, we do have gentlemen come as well. And they come in, you can have some wine, have some food. We have raffles or drawings. We have silent auctions, and then what we've done is done kind of a scavenger hunt in the museum that's based on the museum's changing exhibition. Mm-hmm. So, and when you do the scavenger hunt, you get chocolate at the end. So that's never a bad incentive for something to do. So it was a great event for us because we introduced people to the museum. The first year, we had probably about 90 people come. The second year we had about 120 people come, which has been really great. And then we've had people from that event come back to the museum because they didn't get a chance to really see the collections as much as they wanted to, or they brought somebody else who they thought would enjoy it. And that's really been, for us, a great thing because it's not just a fundraiser, but it's also a fundraiser for us to really engage different audiences too. And really get our name out there.
Yeah, yeah. And do you have other fundraisers during the year, or is that the primary one right now?
That's our big one right now. We do other sorts of events where, for instance, we just started this year, we did something called Mantles for the Season, and we had some local businesses, we invited them to come in and they decorated the mantles that were in the museum using artificial flowers or whatever they were interested, however they were interested in decorating it. And it was a way to, again, bring in people to the museum at a time that tends to be a little slower for us in terms of visitation, as well as to do some cross-promotion with some of the other organizations that we worked with, the other businesses that we worked with, so that they could get their name to some of our members and visitors and friends and vice versa as well. So that's something we started this year and we'll do more with next year as well.
That's great. Now, as a nonprofit, you naturally would have a board of directors.
Yes.
So I don't know that you're looking for any board members at this time, but if you were looking for board members, what kind of interest or what kind of specific qualifications would you look for in a board member?
We've actually evolved our board a lot over the past, I would say, maybe 5, 6 or so years, and trying to expand some of their interests and expand some of the ways that we can work with them and they can work with us. So for instance, we always will have people who are clock and watch enthusiasts, repairers, collectors, things like that on our board, but we've tried to become more engaged with the local community. So we have some people with community ties, or some corporate ties as well, because that also helps with some of our fundraising capabilities. And our board of directors is usually between 15 and 18 people. And so we have it constantly where there might be a person or two who's rolling off the board for their cycles. But we also have committees. And for us, that's been a really great way to engage people to volunteer and to see if they might be interested in a board position later. So for instance, if you are interested in working on buildings and grounds, we have a buildings and grounds committee because we have 2 buildings, and they're older buildings, so they're constantly in need of making sure that they're preserved because the museum is in a historic district. So if people have that kind of an interest, they could become part of that committee. We have a marketing committee, so if you're a designer or if you do social media or if you do marketing, then that might be a place that you can come in, have a few meetings a year and really see if this is something that would work for you in terms of your interests, and then it's a great stepping stone for board as well.
Yeah, great. How many board members do you have?
We currently have 15.
15.
But 18 is our maximum.
Okay. Yeah.
And then on the committees, that tends to be, just depends on the committee, how large it can be. You don't want to too many people on there, because then nothing gets done.
Nothing gets done.
Rather have a smaller core of hard workers, right? But we have volunteers at the museum as well. Okay. We have clock winders who come in to volunteer, and we have people who volunteer to do things in the administrative offices, labeling envelopes and things like that, sending out mailings, people who give guided tours, whether they're for kids or adult groups and things like that. Okay. So we have a lot of volunteer opportunities on top of board participation too.
Okay. So if I were going to walk in today and just take a self-guided tour, can you kind of walk us through what we would see? I know there were some individual smaller rooms and areas, and then there's a big room with a lot of clocks. Can you kind of walk us through?
Sure.
Okay.
So when you walk in, you're greeted by one of the wonderful staff who works at the front desk, and they'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the museum, so you're not going in cold. They'll tell you a little bit about why there's a clock museum in Bristol, Connecticut, which is probably the biggest question that we get asked, and give you that little bit of history about why it's here and how the museum has grown and expanded over the last years. You'll also see an exhibition called Connecticut Clockmaking in the Industrial Revolution, which talks about the development of the clock industry and how that really expanded, not only here and it expanded the manufacturing here, but how that impacted other kinds of industry as well. So you'll see from the early 1800s all the way up through, the probably 60s, when a lot of the industry really changed in the States. We have the large room that you were referring to has a lot of our tall case clocks in it, our grandfather clocks, as they're called more commonly, and it's a great place because many of them tick and chime. Our old cranks wind them weekly, and so you hear a lot of the wonderful sounds of the clocks in that space. And those are really just beautiful timepieces, and people really can enjoy sitting in there and watching them, listening to them. We have a novelty clock gallery, which is something we opened up a couple of years ago with some of the novel, fun timepieces, those character watches that everybody remembers having when they were kids, hickory dickory dock clocks, and some really fun, unique kinds of timepieces, and those tend to be more modern. So you see really the gamut of the clock and watch industries. And we are working on showcasing more of our watch collection. Okay. So we have a great map case that we're retrofitting, so it will be visible storage, and you'll be able to open up the drawers and see more examples of our watch collection. And then every year we have a changing exhibition. And so if you come this year, pretty much through the end of January of 2018, it's an exhibition called Scandals and Scoundrels, Tales from the Dark Side of the Clock and Watch Industry. Okay. And then in 2019, our exhibition is going to be on advertising for clocks and watches and how the look of it changed as well as the message of it changed.
Oh, that will be interesting.
Yeah. So there's lots of different types of things that people will get a chance to see as they walk through. And it's a great experience because you have the visuals, but you also have the sound.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the Scoundrels.
The Scandals and Scoundrels. So this exhibition started off because I went to hear a talk from one of our volunteers, and she had this great story of a scandal that happened with the Terry family. And I thought, that would be a great exhibition because who doesn't love a good scandal, right? Everybody loves that. But it's also a great way of storytelling using some of our timepieces. And that's one thing that we try hard to do is really just talk about the stories behind the mechanics. And so the different stories that we tell are everything from tales of fraud. There's some tales of murder. There's workplace shenanigans, things that have to do with like the Radium Girls and how they're working in the clock industry in the early 19th century really changed safety regulations that we kind of think about now and take for granted, but that was something that they really worked hard on. And it's, as I said, it's just an interesting way of looking at the timepieces. So we have these stories about them and then an example of one of the timepieces that either somebody made or were involved in the scandal, excuse me.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. What a neat idea.
It's fun. It's been pretty great. It's also enabled us, from a nonprofit standpoint to expand out with some of our sponsors to be be able to reach out to other organizations to help support these kinds of exhibitions, and then we're able to turn around and, offer them tickets to come and tours and publicity and things like that. So that's been for us a really a great way also to expand what we can do for the community as well as what the community can help with the museum, and really making those partnerships happen.
Yeah, wow, that's wonderful. And the advertising sounds like it'll be really interesting too, because advertising has changed so much.
Absolutely.
Over the years.
Absolutely.
That it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, those messages really change, and you can look and see what's going on socially as well as just the visuals of it. So I'm excited about that as well.
That's wonderful. That's great. And now you have a website.
Me too.
And what is your website?
The website is clockandwatchmuseum.org. And you can visit us there. We are also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or you can always go the old-fashioned route and call the museum, which is 860-583-6070.
Okay, great. We have a few more minutes. Is there anything else that you want to share with us about the museum that you think our viewing audience might be interested in knowing about?
Sure. One of the things that I would say that people don't necessarily think about so much is, but we're incredibly kid-friendly and family-friendly as well. We do special programs for children. We've done great things like Mad Hatter's tea parties, because the White Rabbit, and who's late, he's late, he's late. We've done painting programs, we've done time capsule programs for families, but if you come on a general basis, we have a scavenger hunt that's throughout the museum that's kid-friendly, a visual scavenger hunt as well as alphabet scavenger hunt. And the kids actually love it. They get really engaged with it, and the timepieces as well. So I would encourage people to bring families over to see it as well.
What particular age group, when you talk about kids, are you talking about just all ages?
Yeah, we have a little boy who's 4 years old, and he became a member because he loves timepieces, and something about the ticking and the chiming he was very into. So, kids like that as well. Up to, they're learning about the telling time in school sometimes when they're in about second grade. So seeing the old-fashioned clocks, some of the older-fashioned clocks really engages kids because they're learning about it in school, and it reinforces that. So we're really appropriate for pretty much all ages.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. We don't think about time just on a daily basis, but we think, even looking back at history, just time is always important, and we were looking back the different time frames, different just time in general. Certainly in the present, time is important because we're having to schedule and be places, and time is just critical. And then even planning out in the future, just time is important.
It absolutely is.
And to think about all the different ways that time has been revealed, and watches, clocks, so many different types of timepieces.
Absolutely.
And I know one of the things that your website talks about is sundials.
Yes.
And you have a sundial garden,
yes,
I believe,
we do.
at your location.
We do, and it's quite beautiful. The Bristol Garden Club maintains it for us, which we're forever grateful for their sharing of their talents with us to do that. And it's quite lovely out there in the summertime. A nice little bench and with the sundial. And, we think of them as such an old-fashioned thing, but they really work quite well.
Yeah.
They really do.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I've certainly seen them, but never had to work with one on a 24-hour period.
It is a little easier just to look at your watch and a little bit more accurate.
But that's beautiful. So I'm just really, really excited that that you are with us here today, and I hope that our viewing audience will take the time to come and visit your museum and find it. Tell us one more time what your website is and your phone number and how to reach you.
The website is clockandwatchmuseum.org, and the phone number is 860-583-6070, or come visit us on Maple Street in Bristol.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patti, for being here with us today.
I appreciate it.
And I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean for the Nonprofit World. Have a great day. Hello, and welcome to the Nonprofit World, where we highlight organizations and individuals who are passionate about empowering people to make a difference in the lives of others. in our communities and around the world. I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean, your host for today's program. And I have with me today, I'm so excited, I have Christina Bennett, who is the Communications Director of the Family Institute of Connecticut.
Yes.
Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Paula. I'm really grateful to be here today.
I'm so glad that you're here with us today. And I'm just excited to hear more about the Family Institute of Connecticut and how you got involved with them.
Sure, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about your history and how you got involved with the Family Institute of Connecticut.
Sure. Well, I am from Connecticut. I grew up here in Connecticut. I went to high school here, and I also went to college at Southern. After college, I did some ministry work. I went away to DC and Atlanta for a couple of years doing prayer ministry, different faith-based ministries. I came back to Connecticut in 2012. And shortly after that, I started working for a pregnancy resource center called the ABC Women's Center. I worked there for 4 years as a client service manager. And during that time, we worked with the Family Institute of Connecticut, which is led by Peter Wolfgang. He's the president. We worked with him. They were very helpful when it came to different policies and things that were happening at the Capitol, especially in regards to negative bills coming against pregnancy centers. There's a movement with pro-choice groups and radical activist groups to get out misinformation about pregnancy centers. And so FIC was a group that we could go to for help. And then even when it came to connecting with our local leaders, our state senators, our state reps, we could go to them for help as well with that process. So I connected with them while working at the Pregnancy Resource Center. But then things got more intense at the Pregnancy Center when it came to outside attacks. One summer, we had a protest outside of our doors by a radical pro-choice activist group called NARAL, Pro-Choice Connecticut. And when that happened, I realized that it was difficult to do the work that I was doing inside of the center and still fight outside for the protection of the center and the protection of the client. And so shortly after that, I ended up transitioning out of my role at the Pregnancy Center and coming to the Family Institute to work as the communications director. So now I am still supporting the pregnancy centers and other, nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, and people, but in a different way. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of been my journey, and I just started at FIC this past January. So I'm coming up on a year.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, I know that you're an asset to them, and I know that you were missed at the pregnancy center. So that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that story with us. So tell us. What has 2018, what are some of the things that have happened during this past year that have just gotten you on your feet and out in the public?
Sure. So 2018 has been a remarkable year, I'll say, especially for the Family Institute of Connecticut. We've had a lot of fights, and we've seen a lot of victories. A couple of things that stick out to me are HB 5416 and HB 5417. Those were bills. One of the bills, HB 5416, was a bill accusing pregnancy resource centers of false advertising, and if this bill had passed, it would have controlled the free speech of pregnancy centers all across Connecticut. It was accusing them of false advertising without any proof of actual false advertising, and even something as simple as pregnant need help with a question mark on the back of a bus, for example. Some of the people who were proposing this bill in NARAL Pro-Choice Connecticut were saying pregnant need help is false advertising, because if a woman sees pregnant need help on the back of a bus, she's going to think that you're offering her abortion. And when she gets to the center, she's going to realize that you don't. Which is totally false, because pregnancy centers make it very clear on their websites that they do not perform or refer for abortion. They make that clear when you call them on the phone. And even if you didn't go out on the website and you missed calling them on the phone, when you walk in the front door, they're going to tell you we don't perform or refer for abortions. So there was really no proof that there was any kind of false advertising going on. But unfortunately, still, this bill got a hearing before the Public Health Committee. And so we rallied, people people to come together. And it was the same day as HB 5417, which was the doctor-assisted suicide bill. This is something that the Family Institute of Connecticut has fought multiple times and won. The last few years, this has come up. And what people don't understand about, doctor-assisted suicide is that when we talk about it, it's often painted as, we've got these, elderly people and they want to die with dignity, and why would we continue to let them suffer? Why wouldn't we give them the right to be able to die with dignity? But what people don't realize is that these bills, these doctor-assisted suicide laws, when they pass, they really hurt elderly people and they really hurt disabled people, because now people are having to advocate for themselves. And the doctors are saying, well, instead of giving you all this care, which is so costly, why don't you consider ending your life? Mm-hmm. And so there's multiple reports of people who have suffered because they've been pressured now, because this is on the table and it's a cheaper option and it's an easier option. Mm-hmm. And it also plays into things like elder abuse. So we already know, Mother Teresa commented on this years ago when she came to a presidential prayer breakfast, and she talked about how in America, how we treat our elderly and how poorly we treat our elderly, because of course what she did was she was taking care of people when they were dying. And I've worked before as a volunteer at elderly homes. When I was in college, I did that. And then after college, I volunteered at elderly homes. And I would see how people would be lonely and their kids wouldn't visit them. And so now you put this on the table as well. And it can really lead to elder abuse, because instead of children and families caring for the elderly, they have the option of doctor-assisted suicide. Oh, take a pill, or, take a shot, and then it's all over. So again, it's portrayed in one way, and then the reality is something that's very different. So both the HB 5416 and 5417, the bill against the pregnancy centers that would have not just accused them of false advertising, but if it passed, it would have punished them. It would have fined them, money every time they did an ad or something on Google or something on their website that didn't go along with what the state thought was acceptable. And that would have hurt them, especially because these are nonprofits that don't bring in a lot of funds and they don't charge for their services. So we went to the Capitol, we gathered people, and we were there for 11 hours. 11 hours standing and waiting and praying, and then finally getting to testify against these bills. And thank God they both ended up dying in committee. And so we did not have to worry about that. That was a huge victory. And that was something that really gave the pregnancy center leaders, as well as the disability rights activist groups that we partnered with, a lot of courage and hope, and they're very grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Wow, that's quite a story there.
Yes.
Wow, that's great. So what other things does the Family Institute of Connecticut work on? What are some of the other interest or programs that you have?
Well, FIC is a 501c3, but then we also have a 501c4. And so we do some political things that can be lobbying, connecting with different senators. We're pro-life, pro-family organization. And so that can be difficult in Connecticut, because Connecticut is one of the top 10 least pro-life states in the nation. We don't even have parental notification laws. So the majority of states in the country require teenagers to notify their parents if they're going to have an abortion. In Connecticut, teenagers have to notify their parents if they want their ears pierced. They have to notify their parents if they want to go tanning. They have to notify their parents if they want a tattoo. But if they want a surgical or medical abortion, they do not. And so we send out through our 501c4, list of endorsements, but then we also work with different people in the government and the local government to try to pass these bills, like possibly a parental notification bill, which we haven't seen happen in Connecticut recently, but we would like to see that happen. And we're also just a place of support for families and people that have questions where they feel like maybe their faith is it's being taken advantage of, or there's something happening in their community and they don't know who to talk to. So, and sometimes those are controversial things. We've had families come to us where there may be a a daughter who was running on the track team, and because of transgender laws, there was a biological boy who took first place and took a spot away from her as a biological female. And so sometimes families don't feel like they have any advocates for those kind of tough situations, and they're very controversial, hard to talk about in society without people thinking that you're, hateful. And so in those situations, we meet with the families and we try to help them to be able to advocate for their children in whatever ways that are necessary. And so, we also go into churches, we go into youth groups. I was just myself at a youth group this past Sunday night, a Catholic youth group in Torrington. I'm talking to them about pro-life issues, talking to them about the March for Life. We gather with college students. I was at UConn for a pro-life event that they had not so long ago. We really try to partner with local churches and get together with them and do different events. I mean, faith, family, freedom, that's kind of a tagline for us. And so anything along those lines, we are Connecticut's only real active social conservative group. And so that can be very hard in a very liberal state like ours. But we are nonpartisan, so we're not a Republican group or Democratic group. We are a nonpartisan group, so anyone can come alongside of us if they have similar values and they're working towards similar goals. And so a lot of what we do, aside from the basic things, standing for life and family and marriage, but a lot of what we do depends on what's happening in our state, in the current event. So going into 2019, what we do, a lot of it will be a response to whatever we see happening in our local government and in our state.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, is FIC, are you a legal organization or just do you have attorneys that will help in situations, or how does that?
You mean if someone's coming to us and needs help? I mean, we can also connect with them and then refer them to other organizations as well. And so sometimes we'll do that. I mean, we are a local affiliate focused on the family, and so we'd be considered like a chapter of that, or also the Family Research Council, which is another group. But we work with groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom. Those are groups that have gone to the Supreme Court on behalf of people, like Jack Phillips, for example, who was the Colorado baker who, when a couple came in and they wanted a cake for their gay marriage cake, he said, "I can bake you anything, but I'm not able to do this because of my religious belief, bake this particular cake." And then there was a lot of controversy surrounding that. And so groups like ADF, they help support people like Jack Phillips and their free speech rights to be able to say, I feel comfortable doing this, but I don't feel comfortable doing that. And, for him, the Supreme Court decided in his favor, not whether or not he had a right to bake the cake or not, but just they decided in his favor over the fact that they felt like he was being discriminated. That the group that was supposed to prevent discrimination then in turn ended up discriminating against him and trying to, shut down his business. And so if we have similar situations, which we sometimes do, where people are attacking, maybe the Catholic Church or, homeschooling community is another one. We have partnered with the homeschooling community multiple times in 2018 because there was a death of a child, which is really a horrible situation, and it didn't have anything to do with the homeschooling community, but it was blamed on them because his mother had taken him out of school. So really he was just, truant. He was just not in school, but they made it seem like he was being homeschooled. And so then there's all these investigations where the government was coming into communities and trying to knock on the doors of homeschooling parents and, question them. And so the homeschooling community, they gathered at the Capitol twice, and Peter Wolfgang, our president, he spoke on their behalf, and he has children that are homeschooled as well, and so he understands that. And so we really, in a state like ours, a very liberal state, we really represent people who are, people of faith, or conservative people, or people with certain values that they feel like they don't have an ability to voice what they believe, or sometimes they're scared, they don't know how to voice those things. And so if we we help them through doing, working with them ourselves, or like I said, if they need a lawyer, if they need legal care, then we'll connect them with other partnering organizations.
Yeah, that's great. Wow, and it's so important to have an advocate, somebody that can help you with those issues that come up when you really feel like there's nothing you can do.
Absolutely.
There's no place to go.
Absolutely, and we want to be a voice for people, and especially people that are underrepresented here in the state of Connecticut, and let them know that they don't have to be afraid to speak up. And oftentimes when it comes to these issues, people are really afraid and they don't know how to voice what they believe in a compassionate way or a kind way, or if they're dealing with discrimination, whether it's a pregnancy center leader or someone in a high school situation who's might, let's say for example, they want to start a Christian club and the school is saying no, that's not allowed, and it's easy for students to just say, okay, well then I'm not going to do it. There's been a few instances, even with the pro-life club at UConn, that there's controversy surrounding that when that got started, because one of the girls who started it, she put it on Facebook and the paper wrote about it, and the title was UConn Pro-Life Club Sparks Controversy. And it really shouldn't, because there's no reason that she can't have a club just like anybody else to talk about what's important to her. But she had to press through that. And so when we saw that, we contacted her and said, let us know if there's anything we can do to help. And she said, can you come speak? And so we did that.
Wonderful. Now, do you offer classes or seminars or that type of thing for families or for school students, anything like that?
Not really currently. We kind of base things on need. So if there were parents who came to us and said, we need a class on how to speak up about this or that, then we would offer that. And so we kind of just base it on who approaches us and what their needs are. And if somebody came to us and they were looking for something specific that we didn't provide, we would maybe tell them about another organization. So if somebody called us up, because our name is Family Institute of Connecticut, so somebody called us up and said, I need help with supporting my children or a pregnancy, then we would say, oh, let's connect you with a pregnancy resource center, and they can, if they wanted a breastfeeding class or they wanted a parenting class or something, for example, we would partner them with that. But a lot of what we do is related to taking phone calls, meeting people where they're at, going to the Capitol, partnering with them, going out to church events. We also do faith-based things like prayer meetings, praying for the government. There are a few different groups in Connecticut that will gather. They'll pray at the Capitol multiple times throughout the year. They'll pray in different conference calls. They'll gather for events, and we think that's really important because the scriptures call us to pray for our local government. But it's also important because we may not always agree with a particular leader, but if we pray for them, we're humbling ourselves and we are trusting God to do what He wants with them. And so that's something that we do as well. I've gone to just a ton of different prayer meetings all throughout 2018 and in different parts of the state, praying for our elected officials.
Wonderful. Now, as the Family Institute of Connecticut, you covered the entire state of Connecticut.
Yep.
Do you get a lot of phone calls from people outside of this area? I mean, like from the far reaches of the state?
I mean, we get phone calls from people all throughout Connecticut. I just wrote an article. We have a blog, www.ctfamily.org, and I just wrote an article about doctor-assisted suicide, and it was after we got a phone call just last week from a woman who was a caretaker for a young lady in her 30s, but she had severe disabilities, and she ended up going to the hospital. She fell into a coma, and the doctors were pressuring her mother to pull the plug. And so she called us and asked for help, and asked if I could call this mother and talk with her about the situation, just letting her know her rights, that she had a legal right to be able to put up that boundary and not be pressured by the doctor to to pull the plug on her daughter. And so we ended up, and it was interestingly enough, the day that she called me was the anniversary or the birthday of Terry Schiavo, who passed away, who was a very famous case about her and her husband wanting to pull the plug on her against her brother's wishes. And so her brother has actually started a foundation, the Terry, I think it's Life and Hope Terry Schiavo Foundation. And so I was able to call back this mother and connect her with resources. And that one including a bioethics group that they will call you and give you counsel. So they were able to call her in the hospital. Unfortunately, her daughter did pass away. I found that out today. I got another phone call from the same woman saying that her daughter did pass away, but the mother felt as if she did everything she could do. And that was really important. So instead of feeling pressured by doctors and I had to pull the plug and I never would have known if my daughter could have gone on to live a little bit longer, instead she felt like I did everything I could do. My daughter passed away, but I don't have to live with any kind of questions about what I did or didn't do. So we get all sorts of phone calls throughout the state, and we just try to help the best that we can.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you.
How about how you're funded? And we've just got a couple minutes left, but can you tell us how you're funded and how people can get involved with the organization? I don't know if you need volunteers or...
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we are a nonprofit, and so we don't obviously get any government funding, and we get our funding from private donors, and so we raise money. We have a banquet once a year that we do. This past year we had Pam Tebow come, Tim Tebow's mother, and she talked about her story of faith, and that was a fundraising banquet. We also do, like right now we're doing a year-end giving campaign, and so people can give towards the work of FIC, or they can give towards the work of our PAC organization, and so people can give at any time, and we greatly appreciate it. Every dollar that comes in, we're grateful for, and they can give by going to the website www.ctfamily, or they can also go to our Facebook page. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Family Institute of Connecticut, or they can call the office. They can just Google us, and it's really easy to find, and we would definitely appreciate everything. And when it comes to volunteers, absolutely, we expect that come 2019, there will be more attacks on pregnancy resource centers and faith-based organizations. We expect it because of, unfortunately, leadership that's coming in that's not in alignment with the views of centers. So we could really use people to come to the Capitol, write letters to their legislators, write letters to their state senators, show up with hopeful, cheerful, positive signs that show their support for centers and whatever else may come our way. So if anyone's interested in volunteering, they can just go on our site or contact me. My email is cbennett@ctfamily.org.
And Bennett is?
Bennett.
Okay, so cbennett at
ctfamily.org.
ctfamily.org.
Yep.
Okay.
And anyone that's interested in volunteering, they can talk with me, and then we can set up an interview and go from there.
Okay, and your website again is?
www.ctfamily.org.
ctfamily.org.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so what are the demographics of the people that you are mostly helping or working with?
It's really all across the board, So if we're talking about working with homeschooling families, then we're really helping them and their children. If we're talking about, assisted suicide, then we're looking at the elderly and the disabled community. If we're talking about pregnancy centers, we're helping not just the leaders, but even the women and their babies that are coming in, because if we can help keep those doors open, then it helps everyone. So really, it really is the whole family unit. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, children, the unborn. We do a lot of work, 40 Days for Life, and we'll go stand outside of the abortion clinic and pray. And, I'm going to go speak for the March for Life with local Catholic groups. I'm going to take a bus trip up to DC. So it really is just the entire family. If there's a way that we can help them in relation to what we do, then we're here for that.
How many years now have you done the March for Life?
I've done the March for Life personally for, I think, on and off since maybe the, early 2000s. I mean, I moved to DC myself in 2005, and I was doing pro-life work there, and so I did it a few years when I was in DC, and then I missed a couple years, but I'm not sure how long Peter FIC has done it, but I imagine they've probably done it their whole existence, which I think is since 1989. So
yeah. Great. Is there anything else, Christina, that you would like to tell our viewing audience?
Sure. I would just like to encourage them again to get connected with us through social media, because this is where we are discussing, current events, what's going on in Connecticut, what we're doing. If there's one way to connect with us, it's online. Read our blogs. I write a lot of articles about different things that are happening in society, whether it's the Supreme Court, our Planned Parenthood, or anything. And we would love just the feedback. So we'd love to hear what people are thinking and dialogue with them through those different channels.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I know it just sounds like you're doing great work there at the Family Institute of Connecticut, and just eager to see what the new year is going to bring for all of you.
Thank you.
So that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
For being here with us today, and for all the work that you're doing, because it's amazing and it's much needed.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean for the Nonprofit World, encouraging you to embrace your passion and make a difference in the life of others today.